Yo, tell me if this feels like you. You make more than your parents did, maybe 2, 3 times more than your parents did, but you still, like, check the bank with one eye closed. Why is that? Like, why is that? You feel that knot in your stomach when you talk about finances. 3 days before payday, you're, like, checking the account, hoping it drops in early, and you can't really explain why. Like, what is this thing? Because on paper, you're doing fine, right? On paper, you're doing fine, but for some reason you feel behind and you can see it. So the feeling isn't wrong. Like you are still paycheck to paycheck, better off than your parents, living technically better than your parents, but it sucks. Well, here's what nobody put in the pamphlet. Here's what nobody here's what nobody told you. Like the rules that your parents played by, the game that they got to enjoy, the work hard, make money, live below your means. Those rules don't hold true anymore. That's the tough part that nobody talks about. Like when you think about the housing market, the housing cost, inflation, the layoffs. If you talk to an adult who's in their 50s, 60s, whatever, they'll tell you they went through the same thing. Yes, we've all gone through these periods of layoffs and recession and all this stuff, but the game was not a losing game back then. If you think about it, in the midst of all of that, they were still able to, when you look at the cost of things as percentages in relation to what they were making, it was very, very different. Now, here's what I can say. We make more money, so we should be in a better position, but we aren't. And that is because the economy is changing. And that is because spending has changed. That is because the systems have changed. Like you don't think that working is a big deal until you realize people were able to go to work and afford everything they needed. And so now you say, why am I going to work and can't afford everything I need? Or I can't afford to live in the city, so I move further out into the suburbs. But now people want me to be, they only think I'm qualified, even if it's a remote position, if I live in the city. So because I don't live an hour closer, they don't want to hire me. Like there's so many different mental games that are going on. Or you take a job, really great job, and then they lay you off faster than you could even think of. Yes, all these things and feelings are very real. Um, that's why you always hear about millennials living paycheck to paycheck. But also at the same time, you see people can't afford their car notes, et cetera, et cetera. So which is it? Is everybody overspending, faking it till they make it, or just living la vida loca? Or do we have a real issue here? It's both. It's both and. I'd argue that the focus on people who are um, living paycheck to paycheck and overspending and collecting debt, I'd argue that that is a very true segment of people, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who are legitimately minding their business, minding their finances, and life just keeps getting away from them. You know what I mean? Like I know some of the people talk about like Dave Ramsey. Hey, you don't need Starbucks or coffee, and these kids spend $10, $20 on all these things. I hear you, but you can't just leave the kids at home anymore. School is so ridiculous of when it cuts out and how many days off they have and how many half days they have. So now you're struggling to figure out who's going to pick up the kids. You need two incomes to survive, especially if you're in a major city, unless you are one of the upper 5 or 10% that is making enough to survive off one income. And then when people get laid off, you pretty much exist in a black hole getting unemployment checks or your severance. And when that runs out, you're still unemployed. And nobody talks about the drop off that happens in between there. Very few people are lucky enough to get the severance and then jump into another job. That's not the real world. So um let's remove all of these things and let's just talk about the emotional part of it. What actually hurts is that when you go to work as the best version of yourself. You put all your energy, your creativity, your intelligence into these companies, and then you come home defeated, depleted. and you're giving to something that doesn't belong to you. And then you're doing what they say, when they say, how they say it, and you are completely replaceable. That is a feeling that I think that our older generations didn't necessarily have to deal with at this high frequency. Not saying there weren't layoffs and things like that, but at this high frequency where you could get up to management and then get laid off, or you could be a top performer and get laid off, or they could just create a random email and have mass layoffs. Like we're in this weird, tricky state where also now you could live in an expensive city and it's almost the same money as living in a non-expensive city, which is crazy. But now the companies aren't even paying based on the cities you're in. They're almost close. And what's close? I mean, 20,000 is like, hey, 90,000 in I don't know, uh, a rural Midwest or Southern state versus 110 in Southern California. Granted, it's $20,000 difference, but once you add in all of the taxes and cost of living, it's the same or less sometimes. So a lot of people feel like I'm working really hard. I've given up my identity. I've given up who I am and I'm still behind. And I think that's the that's the emotional aspect that a lot of us are dealing with. And that's where the loneliness and the isolation comes from because when you think about it from a logical standpoint, I'm making money. I'm making a lot more than my parents. What do I have to complain about? I shouldn't be complaining. I should be grateful that I have a job. All of those things come up. And so you suppress everything. But then when the Stanley Cups comes out, now you're rushing to buy a random Stanley Cup, or now you're looking at people online and you're watching 90 minutes doing this, knowing that it's not helping you and it's affecting your mental health, but it's like an escape that you need for the day because you've just been dealing with so much in your head. So I think that's what I see as a main difference versus what our counterparts dealt with, our older counterparts. And look, you could probably hear my Slack messages going off. Mind you, this is a Saturday. But when you work for a global organization, there's no days off. Could I put it on mute? I could, but even me, I have the anxiety of missing something really important, right? So I think that's where we are. We've kind of doubled down and dug our heels into wanting what our parents had as millennials, and then we just didn't get it in the same way. And if your parents weren't rich or financially stable and you grew up where you feel like you were behind, or even if your parents were rich or financially stable, let's back up. If you felt like doing what your parents told you to do was going to put you in a better position, especially better than they were, and you didn't get it, you feel shorted. And so it's like the 9 to 5 isn't the enemy. It's really like paying your bills is the enemy. There's so many bills. Everything is a subscription. And yes, you can cut it off, but everything's a subscription and everything's a stack, a tech stack, or you can only buy this and you can't buy that. TV, like cable has always been expensive, but now it's to the point where you can't even get the regular channels. So you have to have some type of streaming. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? So there's so many added costs that just weren't there before. You can't. And then let's say you don't want to live and step into this world. They don't even make the TVs where you could really like use the antennas because I've tried and they work. Like the antennas don't work because in my head I'm like, let me cut down all these subscriptions. The antennas don't work, so um, you got to really push to break through. And sometimes breakthrough is just like being in a better place mentally or being in a better space physically. Sometimes it's being in a better space financially, but you really have to break through in order to survive what's going on right now. And like look at me, I'm checking emails and that's where I'm most comfortable is at my laptop. But once I open the laptop, I have Outlook open. And here's here before I get too distracted, here's what I do want to leave you with. Find things that cost you nothing but time. And just really start to unpack what's important and what's not. Find things that cost you money and really start to unpack what's important and what's not. Because sometimes we're doing stuff just because other people are doing them. Sometimes we're participating and paying for stuff just because other people are doing the same thing. Um, but you don't got to travel this road alone. Lean on some people because everybody's feeling this way. So I think the first person in your group to be honest about how they're feeling will create like a waterfall effect, and the floodgates will open, and there'll be more people there to support you than you think. So, all in all, it's got to get better. And if you can figure out ways to make that better by changing your mindset, your what you're paying for or what you're doing, then kudos to you. Because there's opportunities out there. We all just got to find them. We all got to figure out how to get our identity back and our true selves. So, yeah, that's what I was thinking about today. Hopefully that resonates with somebody.